Welcome to everyone. Apologize for the little bit of a challenge there. We're all excited to be here, and Zoom was questioning for a little bit and is now on board. Welcome to this third in a series of webinars by PyroLife for its symposium towards an integrated fire management. We have over 300 registered for this webinar, and want to welcome and give a good afternoon to many from Europe and the UK who have signed on. Good morning to a growing audience from the United States and North America, which we're happy to see. And for some who are coming in from Australia, a happy tomorrow. My name is Lucian Deaton. I work with the National Fire Protection Association with our Wildland Fire Community Engagement and International Outreach. I want to share with you quickly this morning some of the technical aspects of this webinar, and then we'll hear from our speakers. The speakers will have 30 minutes. There'll be about 15 minutes after that for questions, as we've done. The audio and video, or the ability to speak, has been turned off for participants in the webinar. So we encourage you, when you want to ask a question, to scroll over the screen. You'll have pop up at the bottom the Q&A box. And please put a question in there. That will then come to us, and we'll be able to curate it when we come to the question and answer period. Please don't use the chat function if that's available, because we want all the questions in one space so we can see what they are and get to all of them as we can. When you write in the question, if it is easier for you to write in your own language, in your mother tongue, that's just fine. We have the ability to translate it on this end. The questions will be answered spoken in English, but if it's easier for you to pose them in your own language, we're happy for that and encourage it. Also, diversity is obviously very important to PyroLife, both in the research and the folks involved. So we encourage young researchers, women, others to provide questions in. Don't hold back. We want to receive all of them. This is being recorded. It will be on the YouTube channel for PyroLife. You've also seen on the symposium page underneath speakers, broken up into their segments, or on the website. And on Twitter, the hashtag PyroLife Symposium is a great place to share thoughts about today's webinar, previous ones, and the entire symposium series. I want to introduce our speakers this morning. Peter Moore, who will be speaking first, is actually a part of the partner organizations with the PyroLife effort. He will be hosting some of the PhD students that are part of the program, and we thank all the partner organizations who are doing that. There are over 15. If you go on the PyroLife website under the About section, you can see who they are and the real great breadth of diversity across industries that they bring to this effort. Peter Moore is the Forestry Officer for Fire Management with the UNFAO. He has over 35 years of operational management and policy experience, pulling from more than 30 countries of work, including his own in Australia. He'll be speaking today about how to live with fire, where in the world, and what does that suggest. And that'll be over a 30-minute period. We also have Foucault Ludwig, who is the Professor for Water Systems and Global Change Group with Wageningen University. He was to speak today about living with fire. What can we learn from the experience in the water sector? Unfortunately, he had a family emergency earlier today and is understandably not able to join us. But his webinar will become a part of a future one, and we certainly wish him well today, but we will hear from him soon. So to move forward with the presentations, Peter Moore, we look forward to hearing from you. And I think after that and the questions, we may also speak to a recent paper that Peter and some others wrote on COVID-19 to fill in some of the rest of the webinar for everyone who joined us this morning. I know because if you're joining late, Foucault Ludwig has not been able to join us because of a family emergency earlier today. So we wanted to take this portion, and we'll certainly hear from him at a later date, probably bring it on to a different webinar before the series ends, because he's looking at the experiences from the water sector. I think will be a great learning point for this effort. But we wanted to bring Peter Moore and Bethany and Cathelijne on to talk about a issue around COVID-19 and a recent research piece that has been done. They were going to share their thoughts on that. just to fill in the rest of the webinar this morning. And then we'll certainly have questions for them as well. So as they're talking, please do share those as we go through that. But Bethany or Cathelijne, do you want to open just to present that research project?
Sure.
There you are.
There I am. So what we do, so my name is Cathelijne Stoof, and I'm also the coordinator of PyroLife, but in addition to that, we do other things as well. And so our Fire COVID project basically emerged from quite early on, and when the pandemic hit Europe, we were discussing implications of the pandemic on fire management, and it was basically that that we saw that prescribed burns were being cancelled pretty much everywhere. Training opportunities were being cancelled, and so we were rather concerned about what was going on. And Peter and I and Bethany and others connected over this, and so we what we did is we reviewed international guidance based on the idea that if you band together, I mean, this is also the PyroLife vision. If you band together and collaborate and share across countries and across disciplines, we don't all have to reinvent the wheel. And so we reviewed materials that were published and released internationally in other countries, and we also sent out a large survey. And I saw Bethany just turning her microphone and her video on. So Bethany, this is a process-related message. I missed part of the preparation. So Bethany, if you want to add something to this, go for it.
Sure, I'm happy to. So as Cathelijne mentions, we put together a paper, and there will be some additional follow-up papers on COVID-19 or wildland fire management under COVID-19. And the information that we gathered is from a wide variety of resources. So it's just a wealth of knowledge, and we synthesized all of this information. For some fire managers, firefighters, fire practitioners, it may cover things that you're already doing, but in other cases, it may stimulate some ideas about how you could do things differently. And importantly, I think everyone is recognizing that this issue is going to continue for quite some time. So it's a sort of evolving process, and we'll be capturing that to some degree. And I think PyroLife will also share resources over Twitter in the coming months as the fire season progresses or the fire year progresses. I have been putting together these weekly email reminders for the PyroLife webinar, and I will include a link to our initial paper on the next reminder email. So if you're getting those reminder emails as a registrant at the symposium, you'll have that link next week as well. And I think because there's such a wealth of knowledge in the symposium attendees, but also within the greater network of fire minds all over the world, I think there's a really good opportunity to develop this conversation even further. And I know Peter did some presentation this morning on COVID as well, so I think he probably has some good information to share.
Yeah, I did. I mentioned in my presentation that I was talking to a series of Indonesian companies and others, some NGOs and representatives from Singapore, about what we'd found out from summarising the materials. And at that stage, of course, it was, as Bethany indicates, it was, if you like, theoretical, and that we're starting to get some experience of what's happening when people are fighting fires, but they also have to socially distance, they have to sanitize materials and equipment and vehicles and transport and all those sorts of things. And that'll have different implications in different parts of the world. So we're doing that. What we also had was a survey, which I think was 400 and something people, over 400, and we've analysed, or we're in the process of analysing what they told us. And of course, that was pre-season as well. So in the back of our minds is the idea of going back maybe at the end of the season and asking some follow-up questions to see whether what they thought would happen is what actually happened, and what is it they hadn't thought of that did happen, or they thought might happen, didn't happen. Generally, it's as you would expect. One of the things is that that North America, particularly the US, fights fires in a very different way to the rest of the world. The idea of fire camps, for instance, is a relatively unusual configuration in other countries. It happens occasionally, but not very often. And so cramming a whole group of people together, sometimes I understand dozens and dozens, if not even hundreds, is obviously not a very sensible idea in a COVID world. But then by the same token, nor is having people report to a depot or a duty station, go to a fire, come home, and then come back to the depot and then go back home, because that may then spread within the civilian population or the non-engaged population. And similarly with where you have volunteer sort of structures where people get together to fight these things and then go back to their home or to their village or something like that. So there's a series of things we don't understand very well. And there's at pace, I think, at high speed, there's a lot of learning going on about what's happening. And it will be very interesting. Unfortunately, I think for Western Europe or parts of Western Europe, this could be quite a bad start to the fire season. So we may be learning things in Western Europe a bit more quickly than we'd like to. Thank you.
I wanted to ask you all a question that's actually come in from Thomas, and I think it speaks to this research piece that you've all been doing, the survey, and possibly what you may be wanting to look at on that post one as well. He said, while prescribed burning is being canceled due to COVID, might we also see a resurgence of illegal land clearance fires, like in Russia, Indonesia, and the Amazon, if policing and enforcement is perceived to be disrupted or distracted due to COVID? Did you see that in the original report? Was that spoken about, or is that something you'll be looking at as you, take this further?
I'll jump in there because I've had to deal with this. That there's a certain logic to that idea, that the enforcement activities, or that the government agents or the actors that make sure people don't exceed the limits of their authority and so on, whether that's land clearing or whatever, are not as present. That there's a certain logic to that. However, if you look back at the reports, they're all media reports. Every one of them is somebody's think piece or an idea in something that's usually been picked up by somebody else, that was then picked up by somebody else. And so while it has a certain logic to it, a certain rationality, there's no evidence of it at the moment that I've been able to find. And if you'll notice, at least the first place I found this reflected was in relation to Brazil. And if you think about the fires in the Amazon last year, there was a lot of political global rhetoric around the Amazon that ended up involving, the wife of the head of state of one country and a number of other things, all of which was not fact-based. It was not fact-based at all. I mean, the area burned in the Amazon last year in Brazil was about the long-term, the 10-year average. So it wasn't particularly dramatic. In Paraguay and Bolivia and other places, it was definitely something significant, but not in Brazil. So I think we have to try and go back to the slide I had, data, data, data. What is it? What was burning? Where was it burning? What's the long-term average for where a place burned? Did that increase? Did burning in, say, protected areas, is it increasing now? At the end of this year, do we see it increase or not? I think we have to be very careful about something even that seems logical, and we need to sort of make sure we underpin it with information or with data and then information. And there's a number of things in fire management that fit into that category, not just this one.
I'll speak to a different sort of side of that question, and that's I'm based in California, and in the U.S., when COVID really started becoming an issue, and it is still very much an issue here in the US, but the federal land management agencies and many of the state land management agencies in the West primarily kind of just did really broad statements saying we're not going to do any prescribed burning until we understand the scope of this and how it impacts us. That said, as we continue to open, prescribed fires are happening. I have a close friend who runs a really great community-based program in the Bay Area, and they've been doing prescribed burning in the last month in small small sizes, but there is prescribed burning that is continuing to happen and will likely continue to be more accepted as the state and federal land management agencies understand the impacts. But it's a very fluid situation, and I think the approaches are going to continue to be sort of geographically or regionally based as well. But I do have confidence that there's a strong recognition that prescribed burning needs to continue, and that the contracts and the environmental assessments and all of that work that goes into putting together safer quality burning, it's continuing to happen behind the scenes as much as possible. So I think though COVID is impacting prescribed burning, we're going to see it continue.
So I can add some preliminary results from the survey that we analyzed, and we're working right now on the full analysis. I'm looking at our moderator, Lucian. Will you allow me, or
please go ahead? No, we do have the time. There's some great questions coming as well, so I apologize to the audience for seeing my head swivel all the time. But yeah, I think the findings of that project will be great to hear about, and yeah, then we'll pepper you both with a couple more great questions before we look to close.
Excellent. So I'm gonna share my screen, and if all is well, you see a PDF. Is that right, or do you see my entire screen?
Just the PDF.
Okay,
yeah, the PDF format. Yeah.
So our brief one was a review of resources that we reviewed. And so that was really basically an overview of best practices gathered from mostly from North America, US and Canada, but also from some other places. And then our brief two is an analysis of the survey. And because we had so many respondents and sharing into, well, of course, we had a set of closed questions, but then we also had open questions about. There was about 30,000 words of comments entered. So there was a bit more work to analyze than we had planned for. So we published a preview, and this work is available online free of charge, and we can, I bet we can, on the PyroLife website, we can include a link to that, or where also the information about these symposia are listed. Or maybe Bethany can include it in the email about the next week's webinar.
I'll do both.
Cool. So I'd like to highlight here that the work is distributed under a Creative Commons license, and that means that the work can be redistributed, used, translated, and it can even be used for commercial activities, provided appropriate credit is given. And the reason we chose this very open license for the work is that we don't want people to reinvent the wheel. We want people to build. We want to basically foster collaboration so that we can all learn from each other and then together move forward. And so in relation to that, and it's also the reason why here in this webinar we invite you to ask your questions in your own language. Like, we know that not the entire world speaks English, so we really like this message to go further than just English speaking firefighters, fire lighters, fire managers. So if anybody's interested in translating this, that'd be really fantastic. I can tell you that, so our first brief was translated to Spanish by Isabel Tolini, who is a PyroLife PhD candidate, and she also translated the preview to brief 2, and so we'll release that shortly. I'm going to highlight 5 or 6 figures that basically tell the most important parts of the survey. So first of all, this is the distribution of our respondents. We had 443 respondents from 39 countries. Most of them were from the United States. And then there's a range from Spain, Italy, South Africa, Australia, Canada, Portugal. I find it pretty cool that the Netherlands is there as well, of course, and UK, Greece. So we have really a long list of countries. And I should say there that some countries like Canada or contacts there decided to not share the survey within their entire employee list, because people are really busy with the fire management and preparing for COVID. So we received a lot of help from Canada by, for instance, through documents that were shared with us and that we used in the first brief. So the fact that this distribution is such doesn't mean that this topic is not active and alive in the countries where we have fewer respondents from. So the respondents list shows obviously probably a bias in language, and also this was shared between a lot of people. So this also shows our network, and as Peter often mentions, it might also show a variation in emergency culture that varies between countries. So we shouldn't read too much into this graph. That's basically the short story. What we found very interesting, we asked a number of questions about if people were worried about the impact of COVID-19 on the operation of the organization. And you can see that there's quite some, that people are relatively worried about the impact, but still, they also expect COVID-19 to impede fire management, but they also have high confidence in their organizations performing their fire management tasks under COVID-19, so during the pandemic. We see that the standard measures of control of group size, disinfection and cleaning, hygiene, and social separation were adopted widely. And we also asked for if any services were reduced. So we see that mostly support services are reduced, and those were services like logistics, supply, catering, aviation maintenance, and supply and accommodation transportation. We also see that specialist services were reduced, like meteorology and remote sensing, but those were, and that was less. There were other services that were reduced as well, and that is what we're analyzing right now. Another important thing to highlight is, and I mean, this doesn't come as a surprise, we asked about their expectation for a reduction of the people's ability to share resources or services. And so with other regions or countries in need, and many indicated that they do expect a reduction of the ability to share resources in case of challenges. Likewise, they also expect, if they are in need, that there's a reduction in the opportunity to receive help. And so we discussed this in the, I'm on the board of the International Association of Wildland Fire, and we discussed that, and a colleague there shared a checklist that was developed by the National Multi-Agency Coordinating Group in the US that people can use to assess, basically in terms of sharing resources, that you can assess the risks and to see whether it's feasible to share those resources. something that is logical from a social distancing perspective is that we see many people indicating a reduction in number of staff per vehicle, because to reduce the risk of the spread of the virus. At the same time, there were quite some comments about trading an unknown risk, and that is the spread of the virus, with a known risk, and that is the risk that vehicle accidents pose to firefighters, because driving is often very dangerous, and driving well exhausted results in a lot of accidents. Then the second last important thing was we asked for, well, Bethany mentioned that prescribed burning activities are being started up again in some places. The effect of the pandemic on training, risk reduction, fuel management, and pre-season community engagement, they're all things that affect fire management in not just in the near term, but also in the longer term. So we see that the pandemic does affect those aspects, and it's likely to expect that we will see those effects of the reduction in training and the reduction in risk reduction also after the pandemic has died down. Then the last thing is, and what we have found, and if anybody has other information, please let us know. But what we found is that particularly in the US, there is challenges with corona testing for firefighters. And we understood that testing and repeated testing for COVID-19 is not available, or at the time of writing of this report was not available for people with only mild symptoms. And this is very concerning, and there's really a need for rapid testing to keep people safe and to ensure continuation of fire management. And I think, yep, that was the summary. So if there are any questions, Peter, Bethany, and I would be very happy to take them.
You know, Cathelijne, there is one, and it really connects well when you're talking about the impacts on organizations and management, and that issue of social distancing and the trading of risks. Andy asked, he states at first, it's becoming apparent that the greatest risk of COVID-19 to wildland firefighters is not actually catching the virus, but being in close contact with someone who has caught the virus. The impact of this is that anyone in close contact is expected to self-isolate. This could take a lot of otherwise healthy firefighters off the run. And that's certainly true in the United Kingdom, and I believe it's the same in other countries. How do we manage this risk? So it gets into that unknown that you were speaking about as well, looking at.
So what Andy means is that the risk to reducing capacity is not the actual numbers of firefighters who contract the virus, but every time they get in touch with someone, as soon as somebody gets it, anyone that person's been in touch with for I think the previous 3 days has to isolate. It's undoubtedly, I think he's probably right. I think that's the biggest risk to the fire management capacity that's built up. You know, you could, I'm not as familiar with the English or the Welsh or the Irish situation, but you could take out an entire brigade. You know, the whole of a station house could be offline just because of one person. And it may not even be a firefighter. It might be somebody who comes in from overseas, say some bloke from Rome who goes to visit someone in Ireland and ends up turning out to be positive. And so that guy who's been to the station, then the whole place has to shut down until they're tested. So this speaks a bit to what Cathelijne was saying about the availability of testing, because of course one way to mitigate that gap, that risk, or to reduce that risk, is to then be able to be in a position to test people. There was one of the after action reports that we received that we looked at that talked about exactly that situation. There was somebody who had been in contact, so they had to isolate, I think, an engine crew and a heavy heavy equipment crew and somebody else. They managed to cover for the period, because what happened was they were able to get some testing done. So the original person who had been exposed turned out not to have it, so he could come back to work. The next day, 2 or 3 other people whose tests came in negative could come back to work. And then the next day, so it was about a 3-day coverage. They scrambled to cover for 3 days. But if you don't have the testing availability, then you're covering for 14 days. And obviously the implications for weather over 14 days, ongoing incidents and events over 14 days would be potentially diabolical.
Cathelijne, you had said in the study that one example that was given was breaking up people into different automobiles as a way of creating a familiar bubbles, I suppose, is the term. Were there other examples given, or is that something you'll be looking at as the research piece expands to how they found other novel or programmatic ways of dealing with that exposure pool risk?
It was, so what I can say right now is that it was, on the top of my mind, it's really mostly the distributing across multiple vehicles. Mm-hmm. Maybe Peter or Bethany can add. I mean, and this is something where, I mean, the survey was a 10-minute survey in total, so we had really a lot of different questions. So obviously the results of the full brief will be much more in detail. So we can share that when it's ready.
I can share some things that I've seen in the U.S. That have come to being since after we shut down the survey. There's been discussions. So in the U.S., again, the sort of standard operating procedure around large fires is to build large fire camps where sometimes thousands of firefighters are sort of in close living quarters and tents and so forth. And so they really had to rethink how to do this. And some sort of, I don't know if it counts as true innovation. It sort of strikes me as something that kind of goes back to the way we used to do things. And that's a hotshot crew, the Wyoming hotshot crew. Hotshots in the US are 20-person hand crews that are national resources and go all over the country responding to fires. What they did was they converted an enclosed trailer into a cook trailer. So they sort of have a slop wagon that they tow around to fires so that they aren't exposing the entire crew to these large fire camp situations. They have a spreadsheet with recipes and supplies, and they send specific people to do the grocery shopping, and they purchased special equipment for cooking large meals, and they made this beautiful trailer. And then each day, 2 people leave the fire line an hour early to go prepare meals, and the leadership of the crew wakes up a half an hour early to prepare breakfast and lunch for the crew. So they've created this sort of enclosed, confined space, and what they've found is that that's really built a lot of camaraderie during a time when there's a lot of stress because of COVID. So that's one example of sort of innovative approaches to try and protect or keep people safe. Other solutions that they're looking at in the US is we have smoke jumpers, so people that parachute into remote areas to suppress fires, and they have for many years put together food boxes that they drop in to support these firefighters in remote areas. And so the larger fire management system has tapped into that expertise to create food boxes that could be put together for firefighters that are in spike camps, which are sort of smaller versions of large base camps. So there are some really interesting things that are happening. In terms of the vehicles, there is that sort of push-pull that's happening with exposure. Do we expose more people to risk of accident, or do we put people into confined areas and risk infection? There's still a lot of conversations around that, and there's still a lot of learning that's being done because in an operational setting, you often jump into a different vehicle because you're taking a short squad of folks to one area of the fire, or splitting up, groups and things like that. So there's a lot of learning, and I think there will continue to be sort of an evolution of approaches throughout this fire season.
Yeah, Beth, I might just say to that point, Paul shares from the UK that one of the things that they're very much focusing on is instilling and pushing good hygiene, social distancing for the wildland firefighters when appropriate, and also regular sanitation of stations, equipment, appliances, probably anything they can find. And because of that, they're throttling back that risk in the first place. So to add what you were saying, adding those things in as well seem to keep the risk factor at least at an area where it can be managed. One would hope. But yeah, Cathelijne, please.
Yeah, what is nice, because Bethany mentions the increased camaraderie, and so in our discussions on this project, Peter always mentions the and this is also one of the questions in our survey: are there any disadvantages from the situation, and are there also advantages from the situation? So I mean, this increased camaraderie is certainly an advantage from this situation. At the same time, I understood that here in the Netherlands, we had 3 big fires, two big fires and another smaller one about 6 weeks ago. And what was interesting there is I asked a colleague for whether the pandemic caused any challenges, and he said, well, because we work a lot with volunteer firefighters, he says everybody was at home. So it was much easier for them to report to the fire because they were not at work. I also see a comment from an anonymous person. So we see the chat, and if your name is listed, then we see your name. And if your name is not listed, it says anonymous attendee. And they recognize that prescribed burning is less of a tradition in Europe compared to the US. So they're not sure about the impact of COVID. Yeah, you might think so, but the prescribed burning tradition is live and kicking here in Europe. So we're in a group with lots of firefighters and firelighters, and so I think in many places, I think in Wales and Ireland, but also in Germany and in Portugal, the prescribed burns were being cancelled because of this situation.
Well, I think with that and given the coming to the bottom of the hour here, I think if there are no other thoughts that you all have on the research piece. Now, I guess one question, Cathelijne, and forgive me because you probably spoke of this at the beginning. I know it's been released. Where can people find it? Is it on the PyroLife website? Is it on the university website? Where?
It is not yet on the PyroLife website. I think it is on the university website, and I think, and it's definitely on my Twitter account. So good. It's probably the first, the top tweet. I'll double check.
Yeah, and that's at Dr. Firelady for anybody.
Yes, it's Dr. Firelady, and that's my Twitter account. And so the first tweet there is this project. For people who are not on Twitter, if you Google fire management under COVID and WUR or Wageningen University, you find it. It's we have a digital object identifier from the Wageningen University Library, and you'll be able to find it there. If you can't find it, let us know, then we'll send it to you.
I can post it on the blog, the PyroLife blog. This meeting, so I'll make sure that the link is up within an hour or so.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and those blogs will have thoughts back from the different webinars. They'll have the recordings. Those are also on the symposium page, so certainly check out that blog space. And there have been some other resources that have been shared in the comments during the session. I think we'll put those up as resources as well. So just as PyroLife is looking for exchange, the Q&A was giving exchange. So this is a good thing.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, I think with that, and looking at the hour, I want to thank you all for this presentation on the COVID research piece, and also to Peter Moore for his presentation of the World Fire issue this earlier in the webinar. We